Joe Biden has chosen California Senator Kamala Harris to be his vice presidential running mate. We're going to go to Washington now, where the CBC's Lindsay Duncombe joins us with the latest. So, Lindsay, how did Biden announce his decision?
Well, this was something that broke just as the afternoon was unfolding. Kamala Harris is not necessarily a surprising choice, David. She was on the top of most lists of people who were picking the order of which these women would be qualified. We knew that Joe Biden's choice would be a woman. That's something that he promised. But there was a lot of pressure on Biden to choose not just a woman of color, but a black woman. And that is one of the reasons why Harris has been chosen. But certainly, this is someone who is qualified. And one of the things that is important when we look at the presidency possibly of Joe Biden, should he be elected, is he's old. He's going to be 78 in January if he were to be elected and inaugurated. So there's a lot of speculation that the person who is just that heartbeat away from the presidency has to be able to step in and be ready to govern. And if you look at Harris's experience, she is someone who had a big, tough leadership job as the Attorney General of California, a huge state, and now she's in her first term as a senator. So the ability to govern is one of the things that we know Joe Biden was really thinking about. The other reason for that, David, is that there's been some speculation, even fueled a bit by Biden himself, that he is not going to seek, if he were to be elected, a second term, that he is running in 2020 but wouldn't necessarily run again in 2024. So what that does is propel whoever is on the ticket, now we know it is Harris, to a real position of prominence for perhaps going after that nomination in 2024, which would be historic, because that would be, again, someone who would be running to be the first female president of the United States. So a lot of reasons why a lot of people are celebrating this decision tonight.
It's fascinating the path this story has taken, Lindsay, because Kamala Harris seemed like the obvious frontrunner for so long, and then she got picked apart so completely. It looked like she was moving away from it. But here we are. We end up back with her. And tell us more about Kamala Harris and what this could mean for the Biden campaign.
Well, this is a safe choice in the sense that this isn't someone who's coming from the very progressive wing of the party. That's one of the challenges for the Democrats here. And throughout her career, you know, one of the criticisms also in her presidential campaign is that she was someone who's tried to stake out that middle ground. You know, she didn't necessarily have the progressive fire of a Bernie Sanders or of an Elizabeth Warren. So certainly the idea that you're choosing someone that can appeal to the most number of people who might be inclined to be moving away from Donald Trump. And we know that those swing voters in swing states are unicorns. Those are the ones that really, really matter. So there is a possibility of broad appeal when it comes to Harris. And that is likely one of the reasons why she was of the top of the list. You talked about that criticism, and you know, there's such drama that happens in the lead up to all of this, but the criticism came a couple of weeks ago from insiders close to Biden who thought that Harris might be someone who was too ambitious or who didn't show enough remorse because of the attacks that she gave Biden in the primary debates when she went after him for his history with busing, something that she described her own experiences with as a young black girl. And a lot of people dismissed those criticisms that this is someone who is too ambitious, who wants the job of president. Every vice president wants to be president. That's why they take the job. And that it is someone who didn't show remorse. Looking at those criticisms, a lot of people said that's just plain sexism. But the fact that those criticisms are out there, it gives the campaign now to say that she is proudly ambitious, and darn right she's someone who can go after an older white gentleman in a debate, because that's what she's going to have to do in a debate against Mike Pence. So those skills that were criticisms could also be flipped around and looked at as qualifications for the job. She does have weaknesses, though. When something like this is announced, including, the former candidates, you've got Stacey Abrams and Susan Rice talking about what a good selection this is, saying that they will fully support this ticket. It's always this laudatory commentary. This is someone who does have weaknesses, and one of those weaknesses is running a presidential campaign. She walked into the primary campaign with such high expectations. It all started in California with a rally that had 20,000 people. It was political spectacle and organization at its best. But then she fizzled. There were problems with money and with organization, and she ended up dropping out rather early in the process, when the expectations for how far along she would finish were much, much higher. And the other thing where she is open to criticism for, as is Joe Biden, is her history as a prosecutor in California, and how those decisions may be viewed in light of the ongoing protests against systemic racism, the racial reckoning in this country. So she will have to show, as we've seen Biden try to show, an evolution on some of those historical perspectives.
Okay, Lindsay, great stuff. Thank you very much. That's our Lindsay Duncombe in Washington. Okay, so the wait is over, and if you're just joining us, Joe Biden has picked former Democratic rival and current U.S. Senator Kamala Harris as his running mate. She is the first black woman on a major party U.S. presidential ticket. Harris represents the state of California in the Senate and was the second African-American woman senator in history. Before being elected to the Senate, Harris served as California's first African-American attorney general. So, how influential is this pick, and will it affect the dynamic of this race? Capri Cafaro previously served 3 terms as a Democratic Ohio State Senator, including a stint as minority leader. She is now an executive in residence at American University School of Public Affairs. Capri, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
So we have it now. The Veep stakes is over. It's Kamala Harris. What's your reaction to this pick?
I think that this was probably the safest pick for Joe Biden, because he not only had to find someone that could energize the base, energize the feelings of the Democratic Party, but at the same time, he also needed someone that is kind of a safe pick. And what I mean by that is Kamala Harris has, to an extent, been vetted because she did run for president of the United States. She is a known quantity, but at the same time, she's new enough in the Democratic Party, new enough in the national political stage to still have that spark, that enthusiasm. So he had to find a delicate balance with someone who he chose as his vice president, because he needed someone to invigorate the ticket, but at the same time, not be so risky that he could potentially upset the apple cart and lose what is right now a lead in most important battleground states, if not in most states across the country. He seems to be on solid footing, again, recognizing that polls at this stage of the game still are not entirely reliable.
Okay, so when you make a pick, there are people you don't pick, right? So what about those that Biden overlooked? You've got credible names, Susan Rice, you've got Elizabeth Warren, you've got Gretchen Whitmer. Would any of those have made a better pick, or is Harris really the best choice there?
Well, I think that certainly is in the eye of the beholder, so to speak. But given the nature of where we are, this inflection point in our history in the United States, where we are facing not only a pandemic, but also a significant conversation about race in America, racial relations, moving towards an anti-racist society. And so I think choosing a woman was always something that Joe Biden basically said from the get-go when it looked like he was on the path to the nomination. But I think in light of the events post-George Floyd, choosing a woman of color, and particularly an African-American woman of color, is something that I think was that much more important. I think that Val Demings, Congresswoman from Florida, would have been been a very interesting pick, someone who not only had elected experience, but was an African-American female police chief in the city of Orlando, Florida, Florida being a swing state. So I think that could have been a very strong pick. We saw folks like Karen Bass, Congresswoman from California, get criticized, particularly by individuals on the right for basically being a Castro sympathizer for some of the things she said in the wake of Castro's death. Susan Rice is also a lightning rod, particularly on the left and on the right, and doesn't really bring, I think, a lot of enthusiasm to the base of the Democratic Party. So I can see how those two are not chosen. A lot of speculation about Elizabeth Warren, but again, she's older. She may have brought some of those more progressive individuals along, but I don't think it's the right moment for her. Maybe the calculus was she's better off fighting her fight in the Senate.
You know, often when you're picking a vice president, you think of a state that you could put into play.
Right.
Joe Biden's probably going to win California with or without Kamala Harris. So that doesn't seem to have been the consideration. But you talk about the importance of race right now in this race. And we saw a letter, more than 100 black men penned an open letter yesterday urging Biden to pick a black woman as his candidate. So speak, if you can, about the importance of that choice and what that does to the dynamics of this campaign.
Well, again, I think that it really invigorates the Democratic Party and African Americans. Again, we don't want to make gross generalizations to say African Americans are only going to turn out if there is an African American candidate or a person of color on the ticket. That's certainly not the only, litmus test for people of color is to look the same. But as we saw with President Barack Obama, both in 2008 and in 2012, the turnout of African Americans all across this country, particularly in places like swing states like my home state of Ohio, where I am now, that Obama coalition that heavily relied on suburban women and African Americans, this pick in Kamala Harris can appeal to both of those sectors, and they are critical to any victory of any Democrat. And I think now, again, in the post-George Floyd, Black Lives Matter movement that has really picked up steam and has become mainstream across this country, I think that now more than ever, people are looking to the Democratic nominee to show leadership in his choice. And I think had he picked a white woman or a white man, I think maybe they would have said, well, do as I say, not as I do. You're not leading by example.
President Trump already has an attack ad out against Kamala Harris on his Twitter feed, referring to her as Joe Biden's living will. How do you think the president and the Republicans feel about the Harris pick? Do they fear her, or they see her as a target of opportunity?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think that it sounds like, and I have not seen President Trump's tweets. I can only judge this by what you just told me, but that sounds like that there's a little bit more fear in the undertone of that tweet than opportunity. You're not hearing some of those nicknames like Pocahontas with Elizabeth Warren, which he would throw around, which is incredibly insulting. He's not putting these insulting monikers on, at least yet, on Kamala Harris. The day is still young, but Kamala Harris is someone who's proven to be a formidable opponent in the primaries, in her debate performance against Joe Biden. I think it shows that Joe Biden is not afraid to be a partner with a strong woman in his pick, given the fact that Kamala Harris pretty much eviscerated Joe Biden in one of those first debates, if we remember, about the busing issues. So I think that she really does probably ruffle feathers amongst the Trump campaign and within the Republican Party right now, because they probably see that she is someone that is formidable and has both maybe a progressive appeal, but at the same time, while Lindsay mentioned some of the drawbacks of her time, Kamala Harris's time as a prosecutor, for maybe more moderate voters, that may be seen as a sign of strength that she's able to be tough on crime.
Well, it's not really a weakness that people like Mike Pence and Donald Trump are perhaps positioned to capitalize on, right? It's a weakness in a Democratic nomination, but maybe not in a general election when you're running against those particular guys. But, I wonder, there's concern about could Biden get the progressives to come with him? Would his pick, bring that progressive part of the party into the mainstream? Because that was an issue last time.
Right.
Does that matter after 4 years of Trump? Are they just going to vote against Donald Trump, make this a referendum on the current president?
I think that there are certainly some progressive identifying members of the Democratic Party that still do not feel that things have gone far enough, that are still pushing against the quote-unquote establishment. For example, Representative Rashid Tlaib from Michigan said that she was not ready to endorse Joe Biden, at least as of last week. There's been reports that there are at least 300 individuals that are involved in the Democratic Platform Committee that are unwilling to support the platform unless Medicare for all is, basically universal health care is included in that. So there are certainly some activists within the party that are still not satisfied. But I would say that 2020 does look different than 2016. There are a lot of people that are fed up with President Donald Trump and his leadership and his or lack thereof and his style. And how we are positioned in the world and the choices that he's made, both on domestic and international policy. So I think that, in this lesser of two evils, so to speak, there will be people that may have been not unpleased with Hillary Clinton 4 years ago, but maybe realized when they thought that Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump were the same person after 4 years of Donald Trump, maybe they realize that's not the case.
I would suspect that is definitely the case. All right, Caprica Farrow, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Okay, again, as we've been discussing, Joe Biden has chosen Kamala Harris as his running mate for the presidential election this fall. He made the announcement, as everybody does these days, on Twitter. Here's what he said. I have the great honor to announce that I've picked Kamala Harris, a fearless fighter for the little guy and one of the country's finest public servants, as my running mate. Back when Kamala was Attorney General, she worked closely with Beau, that's his son. I watched as they took on the big banks, lifted up working people, and protected women and kids from abuse. I was proud then, and I'm proud now to have her as my partner in this campaign. So how influential is this pick, and will it affect the dynamic of this race? We're going to get the partisan take now. Brett Bruen served as Director of Global Engagement at the White House under President Obama. He is now the President of the Global Situation Room. Jay Shabria previously served as Senior Advisor to Ohio Governor John Kasich from 2010 to 2016. He is now a Managing Director at Mercury Public Affairs. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be with you.
Thanks for having us.
All right, we'll go with the pick right off the bat of Senator Kamala Harris. Brett, was that the right pick?
It was, without question. And I think, as Aaron was alluding to, it is a safe, but it's also a strong pick. I think you're going to see certainly the middle portion of the Democratic Party energized by this. The one downside that Aaron didn't mention, which I think needs to be acknowledged, is the progressive wing isn't going to be as happy. Certainly you got a lot of Bernie or bust folks who will feel that they deserve the vice presidency. But I think you're also going to see some announcements, whether it's in the coming days and weeks or certainly as Biden heads towards victory, of other nominations, Susan Rice, Elizabeth Warren, perhaps others who find a place for themselves in a Biden administration.
Have the Bernie or bust people not learned their lesson from 2016, do you think?
Well, I would like to think so, and certainly given the gravity of what we're facing, health-wise, economic-wise, obviously a social unrest in the country and around the world, this is not the time to be squabbling over ideology and how pure some of these candidates are. I think it is clear to most people that they are far better than Donald Trump.
Okay, Jay, I want to bring you in here. Now, what do you think about Biden's choice? Is Senator Harris the running mate he needs to beat Donald Trump in November?
Well, look, I think there's a lot of things that are going to help Joe Biden win this November, and a lot of it has to do with atmospherics, what's going on in the country, the social unrest, economy, and, by the way, a pandemic. I think those are all things that are working far more in his favor than who the vice presidential pick. Vice presidents don't make a lot of noise. They don't really matter at the end of the day for an election. But the most interesting takeaway for me is this is the most amount of buzz that Joe Biden has been able to generate, since he won the nomination. This has been a non-existent campaign from his basement, and this is something that people are climbing onto because it's a parlor game, and Washington parlor games are interesting. They're fun to talk about. But now that it's over, how is Joe Biden going to generate the interest he needs to sustain it through November? That's what I'm going to be watching for. But I do agree that with Aaron before, this is an extremely safe pick, but there are still some problems too. And one of the biggest problems that you're going to have on this is all the rumored mill through D.C. when Kamala Harris was running is that it was a campaign full of drama, backbiting, those types of things. How is her enterprise going to mesh with the Biden campaign? And then let's say Biden does win the presidency. How is that going to translate in the White House and that administration? Those are the things that interest me.
Doesn't she just get absorbed by the Biden machine, though? Isn't that sort of the price of being on the ticket? You got to play by the presidential nominee's rules?
A little bit, but if you're looking and you're starting to say, you know what, I might be looking behind that desk too, that's when your team starts to have integration problems. I've seen it happen for governors and lieutenant governors, presidents, vice presidents. Those kinds of things happen. That drama does happen. I'm not saying it's going to. I'm just saying it's one of those things that you look at, and I'm sure that was a question that the Biden vetting team had to answer.
Mm-hmm. So, Brett, he looked at a lot of candidates, all of them women, because he did promise to put a woman as in the number 2 position on the ticket. Were there other candidates on the lists that were made public that you think could have been better than Kamala Harris?
Well, I think each of them had advantages and disadvantages. One of the things that I was looking for was to ensure that we had someone who could be a strong campaigner. I worked for Susan Rice. I wouldn't necessarily have chosen her as a candidate for vice president because I don't think that she was someone who was going to be able to get out and glad hand in as much as you can in these COVID conditions. I think there were, others. Certainly, Governor Whitmer had the administration experience, and one of the things that I will look for from Vice President Kamala Harris is that she's going to be taking over, I believe, large swaths of the governing responsibilities. Mm-hmm. This vice president is going to be far different than any we've seen before.
How so? Why do you think this one is going to be so different? Is it because of the perception that Biden's really probably only there for one term, should he win? I mean, not jumping ahead and presuming the election outcome. Why so different?
Well, I think a couple things. One, he has the model that Barack Obama set, which I worked with Joe Biden on a lot of these foreign policy programs, where he was leading our nation's policy when it came to issues, whether it was in Latin America. Clearly, his work in Ukraine has been featured recently. But also, I think there are new realities. There's just so much to do. We're facing multiple crises. I think you're going to have to divide and conquer if you're a Biden administration. Kamala Harris is an ideal pick for someone who can take on a lot of these problems, whether it's with the criminal justice system, whether it's issues related to how we address some of these social and economic inequalities. So I'm looking for her to play a major role.
Okay, so Jay, Brett says she's an ideal pick for governing should they win, but you got to get through the campaign first. And Trump has already tweeted an attack video against Senator Harris, describes her as phony and rushing to the radical left in the nomination to try to win nomination race to try to be where Biden is right now. I mean, what do you make of that? Does her track record open up vulnerabilities that Biden didn't have?
They all do, right? I mean, look, the Trump campaign's been trying to really brand Joe Biden. They haven't been successful largely because he's been non-existent, and he's kind of a likable guy. So they're going to use any of the VP picks to try to brand them as the ticket. Again, I go back to saying that it's not going to make a whole bunch of difference in November, but there is one place that there's going to be another spotlight on Kamala Harris. That's going to be on the debate that she has with Mike Pence. She had a spotty debate record when she was competing for the Democratic primary. So it's going to be, to me, which Kamala Harris shows up. The one early in the debates where, boy, she was prosecutorial, she was pushing the envelope, or the one that gets surprised, because there were several times in those debates she looked like she was a little bit green and surprised by the attacks coming at her. I assume she'll be more seasoned, but that's going to be a thing where people are going to say, well, you know what, she's ready for prime time or she's not, because the presidential debate is very different than a nomination.
So just on this, you said that you don't think it'll matter much in November because often there's not a long history of vice presidential picks being the reason a campaign succeeds or fails. I mean, Jay, is this just a referendum on Donald Trump? Is that what we're dealing with right now?
100%. People do not know what Joe Biden stands for. They don't know what the campaign's about. This is all about the way in which people feel about themselves. Look, Gallup does this poll here in America about how people feel about the country, the satisfaction of the country. In February, it was at a 18-year high. That is now down to June to 13% of Americans feeling satisfaction with the way the country's heading. That is the most telling stat to me in this election. There's an economy problem, there's racial strife, and there's a global pandemic. Those are ways in which people say, you know what, I don't like the way things are going, I may want to change horses. So now it's incumbent upon the Trump campaign to say, yeah, maybe you don't like the way things are going, but these are the things that are going to make it feel better. And people have to start getting back on that bandwagon. Otherwise, it's going to be a pretty bad election night for the Republicans.
Brett, how do you see it? Is this simply referendum yes, no on 4 more years of Donald Trump, or is it more complicated than that?
Yeah, and if I could address also the basement strategy that Biden had, in politics, there's also sometimes your best strategy is to stay out of the way and let the other person, fall on their own problems. And that's clearly what the Biden strategists were doing over the summer. This is a breakout moment, though, and I think Kamala Harris will bring new energy. She is going to respond to some of those questions that people had about Biden and how he was going to represent the Democratic Party and the coalition. I think Trump is going to continue to struggle, as we even saw in that press conference just moments ago, in labeling her as part of this far left effort to unfund police departments and other left-wing progressive ideas. She is squarely in the center, and Trump is going to struggle to try to tar and feather her.
Jay, do you think that's going to be the case? The president will struggle with an attack on her?
Look, I think it's a difficulty no matter what, but I do want to address that point that I completely agree that sometimes you want the other candidate to hang themselves. I don't think that was by design with Joe Biden. I think he was having trouble infiltrating the narrative. Even during the primary process, no Democrat understands how to campaign against Donald Trump. They would all rather be grabbing the narrative, trying to figure out how to put stories out there. That's not the strategy that they're employing. It's happened, and it might work just because of where we are, but that was not the strategy going into it. But going back to your question, Kamala Harris, look, there are some issues that Kamala Harris has. She's got some baggage. If the Trump campaign can successfully convince enough of the progressive to say, you know what, this was a terrible pick, see, all your doubts about Joe Biden were right, they might be able to depress some of that vote, and that can have some implications in the election. The other point I would bring out to you is, look, it does look bleak for the Republicans right now, but I guarantee you there's not one pollster that truly understands how they can model this election when you're talking about a global pandemic. So things are still up in the air, and I would not write it off completely, but it is a tough election campaign for the incumbent. Okay, gentlemen, we're out of time. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for the insights. That's Brett Bruen and Jay Shabria. Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.